Behind the polished doors of plantation mansions, there lived nasty secrets. Secrets so disturbing, so unspeakable, that even history books dared to bury them. The chandeliers sparkled, the fine china gleamed, and the air smelled of jasmine perfume. But in the shadows behind velvet curtains and candlelit hallways, something filthy was happening. Listen closely and you can almost hear it still. The whisper of silk skirts brushing across creaking floors. The rattle of chains muffled beneath heavy wooden beams. The tremor of footsteps at midnight. These were not innocent visits. They were the sound of white mistresses, women of privilege and power, moving through the darkness with dangerous intent. This is the story of forbidden lust, of power warped into obsession, of unspeakable desire where women of refinement turned enslaved black men into their dirtiest, deadliest secret. For centuries, portraits painted these women as saints of purity, corseted, powdered, adorned in pearls. But beneath those calm smiles lay appetites they dared not confess in daylight. This story breaks the silence, and the truth is far nastier than you've ever been told. Step into the late 18th century, across the American South and the Caribbean. The land was thick with heat, the stench of sweat mixing with sugarcane and tobacco, the cries of the enslaved rising at dawn. Plantations stretched like kingdoms built on suffering. At their center, the great houses where white mistresses practiced the arts of refinement, music, embroidery, delicate manners. To the outside world, they embodied virtue. To their enslaved laborers, they embodied surveillance, punishment, and sometimes obsession. Imagine the silence of the quarters at night. Men and women, chained to lives not their own, whispering prayers or humming songs of survival. And then from the distance, the faint rustle of skirts approaching, a door opening that was never meant to open. What if those elegant women in oil paintings carried desires so disturbing, so unspeakable, they could never admit them in public? The system of slavery stripped enslaved men of everything: names, families, freedom, dignity. They were cataloged like livestock, valued for their strength, reduced to property. Their voices were silenced by law. To speak out, to resist, to defend their own bodies against a white woman's command meant death by the rope or the whip. White supremacy gave white men control of black women's bodies, but it also gave white women a different kind of power. Secret, twisted, and no less cruel. Within the shadows of the plantation house, this imbalance grew into something filthy. A hidden reality history still struggles to face, because behind closed doors, white mistresses carried out desires that society called impossible. They coerced enslaved black men into silence, into compliance, into an intimacy that was anything but mutual. No records of consent exist, because there was no consent. What survived were whispers of nighttime visits in barns, of trembling encounters in laundry rooms, of secret rooms tucked away behind walls. These women smiled by day, serving tea and teaching scripture, but by night they sought out what they craved, obsessed, demanded. Some mistresses recorded hints in diaries, careful to disguise their words. Others burned the evidence before death, terrified their filthy obsessions might follow them into memory. The danger was doubled for the enslaved men, who could not say no, who could not resist, who carried the constant knowledge that exposure meant execution. Imagine the humiliation, being treated as a man of strength in the field, then as an object of secret desire in the shadows of the house. The trauma of living with a body that was both feared and fetishized. For these men, every stolen moment carried a lifetime of scars. Fear, confusion, humiliation. They could not protect their wives, their dignity, their sense of manhood. Their bodies were turned into weapons against themselves, used to satisfy the disturbing lust of women who wielded both power and social immunity. Marriages were torn apart, families fractured, and in the silence of the night, souls broke quietly, unseen, unheard. Imagine living through this nightmare, knowing that to speak the truth, to even whisper the horror, could mean your body swinging from a tree at dawn. That was the silent terror enslaved black men carried every day, haunted not only by their bondage, but by the filthy, secret appetites of the women who owned them. It is a truth that breaks the heart and unsettles the mind. Men stripped of freedom, yet forced into a parody of intimacy, unable to claim their own humanity. Whispers of these encounters survived only in fragments. A torn diary entry, a rumor passed down through generations of enslaved families, a line in a court case, veiled but unmistakable. Even abolitionist writings, often bold in condemning white male cruelty, fell silent when it came to white women's obsession. To protect the fragile image of purity, white femininity was shielded. Their dirty secrets remained hidden. But the voices of the enslaved, when they dared to speak, told of a filthier, nastier reality than history was willing to admit. Slave narratives occasionally revealed the unspoken, that white mistresses could be as cruel as their husbands, sometimes crueler. Some wielded whips in public, others wielded lust in private. It was a power they could exercise in the shadows, a way of claiming dominance in a world that denied them political voice. And in that twisted exchange, enslaved black men became pawns, fetishized, dehumanized, reduced to objects of obsession. Picture it, the glow of a single candle in an upstairs hallway, the creak of a stair, the nervous breath of a young enslaved man ordered to follow. The mistress, wrapped in lace, face unreadable in the half-light. She held not love, not tenderness, but command. To resist was impossible. To comply was soul-destroying. And by morning the house returned to silence, the filth hidden once again behind polished smiles and porcelain teacups. The psychological scars ran deep. For many enslaved men, it was a life of constant fear, humiliation, and disorientation. How do you reconcile the terror of violence with the forced role of secret lover? How do you carry the knowledge that your very masculinity has been weaponized against you? Some internalized the pain, others buried it, passing only fragments of memory through family whispers. Generational trauma was born not only from the lash and the chain, but from the unspeakable silence of these encounters. And when these truths surfaced, centuries later, they struck like lightning. Diaries uncovered in attics, letters folded into trunks, gossip preserved in the careful words of oral histories, all pointed to the same disturbing pattern. The mistress's obsession was not a rare aberration. It was a quiet epidemic, concealed by the culture of respectability that idolized white women as paragons of virtue. And yet, behind the lace and powder, behind the clean white dresses, the dirtiest secrets thrived. The cultural reaction today remains fraught. Historians uncover these accounts and face disbelief, anger, denial. For white descendants, the thought that their revered great-grandmothers might have coerced enslaved men is almost unbearable. Many deny it, others bury it. But for black descendants, the wounds are real, resurfacing in family lore, in unanswered questions about ancestry, in the heavy silence of generational pain. For some, it explains hidden branches in family trees. For others, it reopens wounds that never healed. Hollywood has rarely touched this subject. Textbooks skim over it. The narrative of white women as passive victims of slavery's patriarchy has long shielded them from scrutiny. Yet the nasty truth lingers, demanding to be spoken. White mistresses were not always innocent bystanders. Some were perpetrators of disturbing, unspeakable acts, and their obsessions left scars that echo into the present. Why was this history silenced for so long? Perhaps because it forces us to confront a paradox. These women were trapped in their own cages of patriarchy, denied rights, silenced in law. Yet they found twisted agency in the one arena where society allowed them unchecked power, over the enslaved. In that arena, they became masters of secrecy, wielding dominance with a disturbing mix of cruelty and desire. It was lust laced with racism, loneliness turned into obsession, secrecy fueled by fear of exposure. Was it lust? Was it loneliness? Was it cruelty? Or was it the dangerous intoxication of absolute power, corrupting even the faces history painted as innocent? The answer may never be clear, but the impact is undeniable. Look again at those portraits hanging in museums, the smiling mistresses framed in gold. Behind their eyes there may be ghosts, ghosts of silenced men, of hidden encounters, of dirty secrets locked away for centuries. History is full of lies dressed as elegance, and sometimes the nastiest truths are hidden behind the cleanest white dresses. So the next time you see a plantation portrait, ask yourself, what secrets were buried in that house? But the ghosts do not rest. They live in the silences of family archives, in the pauses of elders who know more than they say. They live in the unease of scholars who read between the lines of letters that seem too polished, too careful. They live in the haunting realization that beneath the grandeur of every plantation facade, there were filthy truths rotting at the foundation. Consider the contradictions. A mistress praying at Sunday service, hymnal clutched to her chest, speaking of purity and virtue. That same night, a candle lit in secret, the order whispered to an enslaved man who dared not refuse. The next morning, her face calm, her voice sweet, her body moving through society as though nothing had happened. How many times did that ritual play out? How many nights blurred into decades of coercion? The world remembers slavery in chains and auctions, in fields and whips, and it must. But there is another layer, one less visible, one nastier, dirtier, hidden in bedrooms and barns. It was not just men who turned black bodies into property. White mistresses, too, claimed those bodies, twisting the silence of slavery into an arena for their unspeakable obsessions. This is not an accusation invented by modern outrage. It is written, however faintly, in the cracks of the past. When historians pieced together the puzzle, they found not isolated incidents, but patterns. Patterns of secrecy, of coercion, of denial. Some mistresses hinted in code, others destroyed their own words before death. But the evidence that survived speaks volumes. It tells of power misused, of intimacy turned weapon, of a social order that allowed white women to indulge desires with impunity. Because who would believe a black man's testimony? Who would defend him against the accusations of a white mistress, even if she were the aggressor? And so the victims bore the double weight, forced into silence by fear of death, and erased by history's refusal to acknowledge their suffering. Imagine living with that burden. Imagine carrying the memory of nights you could never name, of shame you could never confess. Imagine passing that silence to your children, who carried it to theirs, until the pain became unspoken inheritance. That is the disturbing legacy still pulsing in black culture today, a trauma that does not vanish because history ignored it. For descendants, the reckoning is heavy. To know that your ancestors' bloodline may have been shaped not only by violence from white men, but also by the unspeakable lust of white women. To carry both pride in survival and the weight of humiliation. For some, this knowledge explains the unexplained. Light skin in a lineage, a family rumor, a hidden name. For others, it is an unbearable reopening of wounds, a reminder that slavery's cruelty knew no boundaries of gender. Yet silence cannot protect us. Silence only feeds denial. The cultural obsession with painting white mistresses as pure angels must be shattered. The nastiest truths are often those most hidden, and only by speaking them aloud can we honor the men whose voices were stolen. We must look at those portraits again, not with awe, but with suspicion. We must ask what lies beneath the pearls, the powdered wigs, the delicate hands folded in composure. History is a stage where elegance was often a mask for filth, where polished doors hid disturbing acts, where hymns were sung by day and filthy secrets acted out by night. This is the unspeakable story of white mistresses and their obsession with black male slaves, a story that breaks illusions, disturbs comfort, and demands we face the darkness that still echoes through generations. The next time you walk past a plantation house, do not only think of the lash or the chain. Think of the shadows in those hallways, the whispers behind those locked doors, the men who carried scars no one would name. And remember, sometimes the dirtiest truths are hidden, not in the fields, but in the very heart of the house itself.